Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters, and today I'm joined by Amy and we're going to be talking about home education in Wales. And here is our little inside gossip, because we have actually recorded this episode before, Amy and I. We recorded this a week ago, and we found that trying to make our way through the quagmire that is the current legislation, not legislation, kind of legislation, sort of advice, sort of not advice that is going on in Wales at the moment when it comes to home ed. Wow. It was so hard that we recorded the entire podcast. Then afterwards, we were both like, oh my God, let's try this one again because this is a lot. So hello again, Amy.
Hello, thank you for having me twice.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time twice for us. So we're going to be talking about home education in Wales, and people listening who aren't in Wales might be like, what is all the issue here? Because isn't home education in Wales very much like home education in England? And what apparently seems to be happening in Wales is that there are moves afoot to make it a lot more legislated than is currently happening in England and even Scotland. And Wales seems to be a bit of a test bed here for trying out a lot of new ideas, like things like registers, etc. So none of this is actually in force right now, but it seems to be looming. And so I wanted to talk about that, but also I just wanted to talk about the general difference between home education in England and home education in Wales. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us, Amy, and do tell us a little bit about your home education journey so far.
Thank you. I home educate in Wales. We have two boys who are 7 and 9, and they've never gone to school, never gone to nursery. I was an early years teacher. My husband was a secondary school teacher, and we just wanted to home educate, basically. I'd watched my sister's children go through the school system, had various issues at different ages, and obviously things that I'd witnessed within school. And we were just quite happy with how things were going at home, and we just wanted to carry on, really.
So you've been home educating all the way through, and you've home educated in Wales all the way through. So, Amy,
Yeah.
should we start with deregistration? This is obviously something that you didn't have to do, but how is the deregistration process in Wales different to the deregistration process in England, or maybe it isn't?
No, it isn't. It's very similar, actually. So if your child is at school, you have to send a deregistration letter. You don't have to give notice. You don't have to say when you're deregistering them. It's in effect immediately, and you're home educating. If they're in a special school, then you do need to seek consent from the local authority. Otherwise, it's a dereg letter. And if they're not at school, obviously, then home education is the default, and you don't have to inform the local authority.
And if they're changing from primary to secondary and that kind
Yeah,
of thing?
yeah. It's worth checking that they haven't been automatically registered. But in theory, when they're changing from a primary and secondary, then they're not registered to attend, so you don't have to deregister.
Okay,
Um,
so far so good. So this
yeah.
is the same mapping across to England. Trust me, listeners, this is, oh, I felt like Bridgerton then. I felt weirdly like the woman in Bridgerton. But trust me, this is probably the easiest part of the podcast. Okay, so let's move on to reports. Once
Yeah.
you've deregistered your child is at home with you. What then happens when it comes to the rights of the local authority to ask for an annual report or any sort of report or any of that?
Yeah. So again, I think it's very similar across the UK in that there's what is set out in law and how local authorities are interpreting that law. Local authorities can make informal inquiries about the child's home education. So it's kind of accepted that an annual report is an okay way of doing that. Um, there's a lot of people who disagree with the name report, the word report, because I think that makes it sound very formal and as if you are reporting to the local authority for them to kind of pass or fail you as a home educator, which isn't really the case. I think a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that local authorities often quote the fact that they have a legal obligation to ensure that children are receiving a suitable education. But that legal obligation is referring to children who are in the school system, not children who are being home educated. Um, So yes, they can make informal inquiries. That can be in the form of a home educator sending a description of what that child has been doing throughout the year, the progress that they've made, the activities that they've been doing. But it's not so much a report. You don't have to fill in the document that the local authority sends you. You don't have to send samples of work. You don't have to meet with them, but it's very wise not to ignore when they do contact you. So we send, I call it a report again, but like I said, there's a lot of talk in the Wales group action group that is discussing the consultation document at the moment as to whether we should really move away from the word report, because it is giving the local authority a lot. It just sounds more important, doesn't it? So yeah, they can make informal inquiries. The whole annual idea again is up for debate. Because in theory, once they know that a child is not missing education and that they are being home educated, in theory, you shouldn't have to repeat that annual report. But I know a lot of local authorities kind of push for that to happen. So I think at the end of the day, it's up to parents how much they want to stand up for their rights and how much they want to go along for an easy ride, basically. I personally don't have a big issue with sending information annually to them. But that might be because our local authority is pretty respectful in terms of what we do as home educators and how we educate our children. I know a lot of local authorities are a lot more pushy. So yeah, and it's always good to go to your local group. If you're looking for advice about these annual reports or whatever you want to call them, it's always good to go to your local group on Facebook, because it is so different around Wales. There is not much consistency around the UK really in general, is there? You've probably found. So it's always good to go to the local group to find out what they know about it and how they go about doing it, basically.
Absolutely. And I think as well as going to your local group, which is your very first step, there's
Yeah,
also a couple of national Facebook groups that are
yeah,
particularly good. There is one called something like dealing with local authority, home ed officialdom and dealing with local
yeah. I'm not
authority
on
or
it, but
something.
there are a lot, and there's education otherwise, and there's
Education Otherwise has been going a long time. Educational
mm,
Freedom. We actually have Cheryl from Educational Freedom doing a podcast with us in the next couple of weeks about reports, talking
yeah,
all about the things you need to do and don't need to do, which is just as
yeah,
important. And there's also, I know that in Wales there is Home Ed Cymru as well,
yeah,
Cymru. But if you're home educating in Wales, you probably know how to spell that one. And
mm,
that's also a very good group to join for this kind of thing. Okay,
yeah.
so it sounds like reports. So far, so good. So what becomes clear, I think, is that the reports process and the deregistration process are reasonably similar so far when it comes to England. But one of the big differences, I think, is in the statutory guidance changes and the proposed legislation changes in Wales. And I know this is a really complicated topic, Amy. So do your best to guide us through what's happening when it comes to the statutory guidance and the legislation in Wales.
I don't claim to be an expert. I'm not somebody who pores through government documents for fun, but
Weird.
I do think it's yeah. There are people, they know more than me. So I really hope that I do not want to spread any more misinformation, because there is so much misinformation out there already. But I really believe that knowledge is power, and I want to empower people to be able to home educate and to feel confident when they're doing it. So yeah, there was statutory guidance. There was a consultation in 2023. The local authorities are currently following that guidance, apart from the section where it talks about having a database of, so a register for children missing education, they were calling it CME. So in Wales, we are following this statutory guidance 2023. That did look as if there were big changes being made, but there's a lot of toing and froing being happening with the Home Ed Cymru group who are dealing with this, and the Welsh government. There was talk of things like statutory meetings with children, the database, having to see examples of work. And having to visit, like I said, having to meet with the children without necessarily having the parents' consent to do so. So a lot of that has now, well, all of that then is not happening. That does not have to happen, because in the statutory guidance, it was using the word should. So the law hasn't changed. Like I said earlier, at the end of the day, the law hasn't changed. This is just the government's interpretation of the law. And what's up for debate, I suppose, is whether this is lawful or not to be able to do that. So when I say the local authorities are following that 2023 statutory guidance, they do not have to do the statutory visits. They do not have to do the meetings with kids. They do not have to see the examples of work, because the way it's worded in the document says should, not
Okay,
must.
so let me just clarify. The statutory guidance is saying you should do this, you should do
Yeah,
that, you should do this. And when you say the local authorities are following this guidance, you mean
yeah,
they're following the fact that it's only an advisory, a should, and it's not a definite, because in law, should means this would be
yeah.
kind of nice to do, but you don't have to do. It's not
Yeah,
mandatory.
and whether it's often the case that home educators have to educate local authority officers about their role. I have seen a lot of job adverts, well, during the time of this consultation, that were looking for home education officers to scrutinise parents, to scrutinise home education, to monitor. So there's definitely this idea in some local authorities. Thankfully, the one where we live wasn't like that. But there is definitely this idea amongst some local authority officers that that is their job. So as parents, it's really important that we are aware that that isn't. They don't have to be doing that. We don't have to be accepting. And in fact, meeting with children, some home educated children, it could be incredibly traumatic for children, especially depending on what they've been through the school system, or special educational needs, for example. So that's what I really wanted to make clear with the guidance. So in theory, we are following that statutory guidance, but none of that has really changed. Even though the wording has changed quite significantly, you could think there were big changes. I mean, statutory meetings in your home with your children without your say so is quite scary. But it's a should. It's not legal.
So what you're saying is that it looks scary because it's saying
Yeah,
things like there should be mandatory meetings, there should be
yeah,
samples of work, but actually because the word should is before it,
yeah.
nothing actually on the ground has changed.
Yeah, it's quite contradictory again, because it talks through the document about how you don't have to replicate school, you can teach your children in a way that suits them, but then they're saying that you should show examples of work. Well, if your child is working in a purely practical way, because that is what suits them best, you're not going to have examples of work. So the guidance, the statutory guidance 2023 is what we are following in Wales, and like we said, the changes look big. But at the moment, it hasn't made a huge difference. The big thing that's happening now, which I think is quite handy, that probably fate that our podcast was delayed or re-recorded, they have just announced that they are piloting the database in Wales, and that's happened really recently.
So by piloting, do you mean that is now also should be a database, or does that mean mandatory database?
That means, so the database, they call it a register. So they're calling it a CME register, Children Missing Education. That was the only aspect they were holding off on with the 2023 statutory guidance. So a couple of days ago, maybe even yesterday, they announced that they are piloting it in 5 local authorities. So the onus isn't on the parent to say that they're home educating. What they're going to do, which is kind of scary again and has big implications, they're going to use local health board data, cross-reference that with the data, the names of the children who are registered in schools, and then anywhere there's a mismatch, where there's a child registered with local health but not in school, is going to go on this Children Missing Education register, and then the
Wow.
local authority will find out why these children are missing education.
So the should disappears from this, doesn't it? Because they're actually going to
Yeah.
be doing this irrespective
Yeah,
of whether home educators cooperate or not, because they're going to find this information outside of home educators voluntarily
yeah,
giving it. So that's why you're saying that this is separate to the should have samples of work, should have
yeah.
mandatory visits. Mm.
Yes, this isn't parents again, which is where it's a really tricky thing because it's whether they can access health records without a parent's permission, whether whether they can collect children's names. It's got some big implications for families if we're thinking about, if you intend to home educate and you don't want to be known. It's a scary step, I think.
It
Um,
does, because from my perspective, what worries me is that if you don't want to go on this register, you may just not take your child to healthcare
yeah,
professionals, which is
yeah,
really, really worrying.
exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
so what is happening? That must have caused a bit of a kerfuffle, because I've been in home
yeah.
education long enough to know that that is quite a cat among the pigeons. So what's the reaction in the home education, the Welsh home education groups?
So this is where I would really urge people to join the Home Ed Cymru action group that we've mentioned, that hopefully you can link here. That is where Ruth, who I get all my information from, and lots of other really knowledgeable people are posting. So they have warned people that there will be a call for action really soon. So it's really important that we're on that group to find out what we, because I think yes, we can do things on our own, but it's much stronger if we do things collectively. Um, and there's a lot of people dedicating a lot of time for fighting for our rights, basically. So yeah, I think people are slightly concerned, and I'm really interested to hear what the Home Ed Cymru group are going to suggest happens next. So yeah, I think it's really important that anyone that home educates in Wales is on that group.
And actually, I would widen that out, because pretty
Mm,
much if we start seeing this kind of thing happening in Wales,
yeah,
then any home educators in Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland can expect a
yeah,
certain amount of ripple effect going on. So
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's like one of those, you can't you can't have one thing happen somewhere and it not have an effect
Mm,
elsewhere. So I think probably this is something that's going to
I
really
think so.
impact on
And I think
everybody.
if they're trying things like this, you can't make it easy, can you? Like you said, if they see something happen easily in Wales, then it's much more likely to be deemed as something, oh, we can do that everywhere then. So I think the other thing that they've mentioned is um, asking why people deregister their children. So again, I would stress the importance of giving a neutral response, because it mentions in the guidance this idea that if you home educate for a negative reason, so if you pull your child out due to bullying or anxiety or school refuse or whatever, um, and it's deemed a negative reason rather than we do this because it's something we really want to do, a lifestyle choice, whatever, it will get noted, or it will be perceived that you will be less likely to be able to support your child at home and home educate them because you haven't done so for the right reasons. You've done it,
Forced into it.
yeah, which is an interesting thing that they put in there, I think, rather
So,
than looking at the
mm.
failings of the school system.
Yeah, so they're implying there that because you haven't elected
Yeah.
very voluntarily to do it, that you may not be prepared for it, or you may not be
Mm.
fully sort of embracing the educational aspect of it. Is that what they're
Mm.
implying?
It's silly, really, because a lot of people home educate later once issues have been identified because they didn't know home education was an option. And then after they come to love it. So it's, yeah, but it's in there. So I think
Okay, is
anything
there
that's put in there is in there for a reason, isn't it? Mm.
absolutely. Is there anything else we need to know of when it comes, or is there anything else that we need to know about when it comes to the legislation, the statutory guidance?
No, like I said, just to stress that Home Ed Cymru is the place to be because there's very knowledgeable people on there. They will inform people, and they try to do it in short, sharp, because we haven't all got time to read these huge documents and figure out what's going on, and it can be really intimidating. But I think it's really important to be on there and keeping up to date with it, because I know we talked last time about how this has been going on years. Home educators have been yapping about changes made and all of this, and it can feel a bit frustrating and like, oh, are they still going on about it? But the only reason we still have our rights is because those people fought for it. And if we stop fighting, then, and I know it's exhausting. We talked about this as well, didn't we? That it can feel never ending, and you've got to balance it between home educating and working and all of that. But yeah, I think it's really important to be on these groups and to keep up to date with what's happening. Because also there can be a lot of misinformation out there, can't there, about I have seen people saying that you have to accept visits from local authority officers, and yeah, it's important to know the facts so that you can respond appropriately.
And also
And this is
they're changing so much as well, aren't they, so
yeah,
quickly?
yeah,
One thing I know is that if they start with registers and things like
mhm,
that, that home educators are going to start getting considerably stroppier about things like exams.
yeah,
So
mm,
because as somebody who's just put their child through both their children through all the exams, it costs
yeah,
me thousands of pounds. So if I'm going
yeah,
to be on a register, I'm going to want my exams paid for.
yeah,
So I just throw that one out there in case anyone from
yeah.
the LA is listening. But
Mhm.
let's talk then about exams in Wales. What is the situation? I know that you have a different exam board, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting, as you said then, that is some of the feedback that a lot of home educators gave the Welsh government when the consultation document came out was, well, if you're going to expect all this from us, then pay for our exams, and that was the only thing they didn't respond to when the group were talking to them. So yeah, so in Wales, you'll probably know more about this than me, having gone through it. My kids are young, so I have done some research. But in Wales, we follow the WJC syllabus. Um, but as a home educator, you have a choice of syllabus. Most home educators sit IGCSEs because it removes the need for coursework and being in school, basically being in a school establishment to do that. So they tend to follow courses that don't require coursework and things like that, and practicals. Parents are responsible, as we said, for the fees at the moment. I have heard some people say that their local authorities will pay fees, but I think it varies on local authority. There was a very small grant that went out to home educators, although I don't think it's ring fenced anymore for home education. Again, I think it was a sly way of finding out where home educators were, seeing if they would show themselves. So yeah, normally parents pay for exam fees, as you discovered. They tend to vary a lot in cost, don't they? Like anything from 100 to thousands if you want someone to teach the course as well. But the papers themselves are around 100, I think, aren't they? Is that what you
Uh,
found with yours?
the exam is normally around between 200 and 300, unless you're
Oh
very lucky
wow.
and get like a little school that offers it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we must be cheap round here, but I think that's one of the things of living in rural Wales, that sometimes there are benefits. Yeah, so yeah, you normally sit exams in a local, public, private school or an exam centre. You can look online. There is a website, Home Ed Exams Wiki. If people just Google that, there are a list of exam centres and lots of information on there. Of course, home educated children don't have to sit GCSEs. There are other options. There are access courses on Open University. There are various avenues, and I think that's one of the amazing things about home education. But I think, like I said, my kids are a lot younger, but I tend to think about the bigger picture, like what are they interested in, where do they see themselves, especially as they get older, and then you kind of work back and think what qualifications will be needed for that
So it
situation.
sounds like exams work reasonably similar to England,
Yes,
but there's
yeah,
perhaps fewer exam centres. And uh,
yeah.
it may be, yet again, it's another example of going into your local Facebook group and just finding out
Mhm.
if there's schools nearby that offer exams. Be aware
Yeah.
that, as I've said in a number of podcasts, if you go to your local school, you tend to be, not always, you tend to be tied to the exams that they do, which
Mm.
may limit your options a little bit. But some schools, they offer the full range of exams. So that's
Okay.
another one. Go onto your local Facebook group and find out about
Yeah.
that.
So I know some colleges will allow you to sit GCSE, will allow the child to sit GCSEs in college, but again, I've heard a lot of people saying that they have removed that ability, or they've withdrawn a child's offer right at the last minute when they've changed their rules. So it appears that it is getting more difficult in some areas, I think, and that's something I think the Welsh government should be responding to, because it's making it really difficult for home educating parents to support their children to get GCSEs. So college is an option for home ed kids. It just seems to vary again. There's no consistency about whether you can do GCSEs in the college or so it's worth checking with local colleges as well about what they offer.
In England, a lot of colleges offer the option for home educated children to go to college at
Mm.
14 and sit their
Yeah.
GCSEs. This is something that's either very unusual or not really allowed in Wales, from what I can gather. Never been 100% sure of the answer to that, but as far as I can tell,
Yeah.
it's pretty unusual to be able to go to college at 14 in
It
Wales.
is.
The other
Um,
thing I think that Amy's talking about there when it comes to sitting GCSEs at college is that you can go onto a course at 16, like a level 2, level 3 diploma, and sit your GCSEs alongside it.
yeah.
Obviously, be aware that that does increase the study load, and that you need to be able to pass those subjects in order to carry on with the course, which adds a bit of
Yeah.
pressure to our young people.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Okay, so let's talk about additional learning needs, which I think is what it's called in Wales.
Yeah.
I know that Scotland calls it something else. Can't remember now. That's my bad memory. And in England, it's special educational needs.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ALNs. Do you have EHCPs in Wales, and how does that work when it comes to home education?
Okay, so children in Wales do not have EHCPs. They're called IDPs. And again, I hope I can give this information correctly. This is my understanding of it. And like when we talk about these things, it could be very easily misinterpreted. But my understanding is that, so they're called IDPs. They are reviewed annually, but parents don't have to be present. And it in Wales, most IDPs are created by the school, so they're not created by the local authority. So unlike an EHCP, the IDP is between the school and the child, the parents. So in theory, when that child is deregistered, the IDP doesn't automatically transfer to becoming the local authority's responsibility when the child leaves that school. So really, it's up for the parent to decide whether having a new IDP with the local authority, which they can request, will be helpful to them, or whether it will just mean more monitoring. Now, I don't have experience of this. I don't have a child with an IDP. I've not been through the process. So again, I think it's another thing for a local group, but it shouldn't be a hindrance in terms of home education. It should be kept separate to the home education report, whatever you want to call it, that the information you give the local authority. It should be kept separate from that. And be about the child's needs and educational support and support needs.
That's interesting. We have done a podcast on EHCPs, and it sounds very similar in that realistically, a lot of the provision that gets put in is very school based, and therefore
Yeah,
once you're out of the school setting, a lot of it isn't relevant. So it's a balance that the parent has between thinking, okay, like, is it worth the hassle and all the other people that might get involved in my child's education to get this IDP or EHCP, or isn't it? And sometimes it will be. Sometimes you genuinely will get that much extra and that much more support and help that it's worth it. And for other parents, it may just feel like it's a battle that doesn't need to be fought. And
yeah,
and there's no doubt, and I'm assuming it's the same in Wales, that getting an EHCP when you home educate is a battle. And I'm guessing the same would count for Wales with
yeah.
the IDPs.
And I think it's like we were talking off camera about how certain needs that really show themselves in school, where they would have to be putting lots of support in place, like, talking about ADHD and brain breaks and all of that stuff. As a home educator, that's not going to be required because you're not replicating school at home. So yeah, I think it would be up for the parent really, and to, like we said, maybe join some of those Facebook groups that are more specific, so you can find out what support would be available from a local authority and whether it would be needed. Because I'm sure there are cases where that support is needed, and cases where it possibly is just more monitoring from the local authority.
Exactly. Okay, well, deregistration sounds like it's pretty similar to England, in fact the same.
Yeah, yeah,
Reports, same as England. The exams are pretty much the same as England as well, except there are the options for the WJEC, but a lot of those have coursework. Then you've got additional learning needs, which is special educational needs, where the IDP replaces the EHCP and is more based on the school, and so you'd have to then pursue that with the local authority. It kind of ends when they leave the school.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it.
Okay. And then the very last thing, obviously, the biggest thing, I suppose, though, is that we talked about the new statutory guidance, the fact that there are a lot of should do this, and they're not necessarily being done. But the one thing that is now being pushed forward is the register, which will be automatically assembled through information from healthcare professionals and the databases from who is and isn't in school.
Yeah, that's the pilot, and we're still awaiting their response to the consultation that happened. So yeah, that pilot will be a big deal, I think, for the whole of the UK.
What are the 5 places it's being piloted? Do you know?
I don't know. No, I think it was literally announced. Well, it was posted on the Home Ed Cymru group yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it.
Which is why I was really, so I think it's good that we recorded today, because I think that's a big thing for people to know and to respond to.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amy, for guiding us through home education in Wales. I know that you are on Instagram, I want to say. TikTok?
Yeah, I mostly chat about home ed on TikTok, actually, but I do post to Instagram as well.
Tell us your social handles. You see me down with the kids.
Is that what they're called?
No idea. I think I may have just made it up, actually.
No, I think you're right. I'm Home Ed Amy on TikTok, or Home Edemy, as my husband says, because it's all in one block. So yeah, Home Ed Amy on there. You can find me. Like to chat a lot about home education and find people who want to listen to me jabber about it more than I've bored everyone else to tears here. So
you're spreading it far and wide now, because you've saturated your little current.
Yeah, I'll find people who want to listen to me. So yeah, I'm on there chatting a lot about it, and I make resources for kids, learning resources, and there I am on there as fun learning resources. So you can find me there too.
Well, that's wonderful. We will go looking for fun learning resources to try to provide a bit of light relief while we soak up the information that we might be being put on a register.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Amy. That is fabulous. I really appreciate you coming on a second time to come and talk me through this. And thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.